Welcome to HFY Chronicles. At the sum of 1,000 subscribers, I'll post a special series just for you. Subscribe now. The acrid stench of plasma burns and the metallic tang of spilled fluids, some blue, some red, hung in the air like a toxic fog over the scarred landscape. Kirzath, a battle-hardened Dactyl warrior with carapace marks denoting his 17 successful campaigns, stood motionless at the edge of the forward trench. His compound eyes scanned the horizon, where enemy artillery had carved what was once a lush valley into a nightmarish tableau of craters and twisted metal. This was supposed to be a simple operation, a quick show of force to pacify the local insurgents. Now, 4 months later, with casualty reports growing and rumors of atomic options being discussed in hushed tones among the high command, Kirzath found himself questioning everything about this mission. But what troubled the four-armed warrior most wasn't the enemy or the escalating conflict. It was the unpredictable Terrans with whom fate had paired him. In all his cycles of military service, he'd never encountered a species so paradoxically fragile yet fearless, technically advanced yet primitively emotional. As the old Dactyl military proverb warned, share your burrow with the predictable dead, not the unpredictable living. The Terran equivalent, he'd learned, was something about foxholes and madness, a concept that seemed redundant when applied to humans, who all appeared touched by some form of collective insanity. Kirzath's antennae twitched at the distant sound of artillery, calculating trajectory and threat level automatically, a biological gift of his species. Determining the shells would land well beyond their position, he turned away from the blasted landscape and ducked into the sandbagged bunker that served as their forward command post. The space was cramped by Dactyl standards, forcing him to fold his secondary arms close to his thorax, a posture of deference his kind typically reserved for superior officers. Inside, Captain Reeves, a weathered human with skin like tanned leather and eyes that had seen too many worlds burn, looked up from a holographic map display. "Ah, Kirzath, perfect timing. Gather your squad. Supply drop just came in, and there's mail from home." The captain's face cracked into what humans called a smile, though to Dactyl's sensibilities it still resembled a threat display. After 4 months, Kirzath had learned to interpret it correctly, most of the time. Irons clicked his mandibles in acknowledgement, offered the stiff-armed Terran salute he'd been taught at the Joint Species Training Academy, and ducked back outside to locate his human squadmates. He found them scattered around the perimeter, some cleaning weapons, others attempting to improve their shelter with the limited materials available. Humans were constantly building, modifying, improvising. It was exhausting to watch. "Mail call," he announced, his translator rendering his clicks and chirps into the flat tones of standard Terran. "Captain says to gather at command." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Even Sergeant Donovan, who had been in the middle of a profanity-laden tirade about supply chain inefficiencies, stopped mid-sentence. Private Elias, the youngest of the group, who had been staring at a holographic image of his home planet's sunset, jumped to his feet with an enthusiasm Kirzath had previously only observed during combat situations. Kirzath had never understood this peculiar Terran attachment to communications and objects from their home worlds. Dactyl warriors were created for service, raised in military creches where individual attachments were discouraged. Your clutchmates were your competitors for resources and advancement, not your family. The concept of missing home was as foreign to him as the concept of recreational intoxication or voluntary sleep deprivation, both practices he'd observed among his human companions with equal parts fascination and horror. As they filed into the command bunker, Kirzath observed the 5 humans under his joint command. They were a study in contradictions, physically weaker than any Dactyl warrior, yet capable of enduring conditions that would break most species' will. Their emotional volatility made them unpredictable, but that same quality gave them a creativity in combat that had earned the reluctant respect of the Dactyl High Command. Sergeant Maxwell Donovan was the oldest of the group, a career soldier with cybernetic enhancements from previous injuries that gave him enhanced vision in his left eye. The right one remained stubbornly human, as he refused further modifications on what he called principle. His weathered face bore the marks of a dozen campaigns across 3-star systems, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the worst the universe could offer and remained unimpressed. Corporal Jasmine Rivera handled communications and tactical analysis. Before the war, she had been some kind of academic, a cultural anthropologist, studying interspecies relations. Now she applied that knowledge to predicting enemy movements and interpreting intelligence. She was the quietest of the humans, but Kirzath had noticed that when she spoke, even Donovan listened. Private First Class Marcus Elias was barely past his species' age of majority, with a perpetual expression of wonder that 4 months of war had somehow failed to extinguish. He carried a small token from each of his family members, a practice Kirzath found inefficient but had learned not to question. The boy was a natural with adaptive technology, able to interface with and repair systems that confounded even the Dactyl engineers. Specialist Vincent Nakamura served as their medic, his hands equally skilled at patching wounds or taking lives. He practiced ancient Terran meditation techniques that Kirzath found surprisingly similar to Dactyl focus rituals. Of all the humans, Nakamura was the most comprehensible to Kirzath, methodical, precise, and economical in both movement and speech. Rounding out the squad was Private Alexis Thornton, their heavy weapons specialist. She carried a modified plasma cannon that should have required a support frame for a human to operate, yet she wielded it with a casual ease that had earned her the nickname Thunder among both human and Dactyl troops. Her laughter was as explosive as her preferred weaponry, and she approached combat with an enthusiasm that even veteran Dactyl warriors found unsettling. Inside the command post, a supply officer Kirzath didn't recognize was organizing packages and envelopes on the central tactical table. The humans immediately crowded around, their usual military discipline momentarily forgotten in their eagerness. Kirzath maintained his position near the entrance, observing yet another incomprehensible Terran ritual. "All right, settle down," Captain Reeves ordered, though his tone lacked its usual edge. "Thornton, package from your brother on Mars colony." "Yes," Thornton exclaimed, accepting a container roughly the size of a standard ration pack. He promised to send those spicy protein crisps from the hydroponics section. "Anyone who's nice to me gets to try some." This announcement prompted immediate and exaggerated displays of courtesy from her squadmates that Kirzath recognized as humor rather than genuine deference. "Elias, letter from your fiancé on Earth Prime." The young private practically lunged for the thin envelope, his hands trembling slightly as he broke the seal. Kirzath had learned that despite advanced communication technology, many humans insisted on sending physical correspondence during deployments, something about holding a piece of home that defied logical explanation. Elias's expression transformed as he read, shifting from joy to confusion to a darkening anger that made Kirzath's combat instincts flare to attention. "That too timing?" he began, then caught himself looking around at the suddenly silent room. "She's met someone else, says she couldn't wait forever and needs to move on with her life. It's been 4 months. 4 months defending her and everyone else back home." "Geordie strikes again," Donovan said quietly, placing a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "It happens, kid. Happened to me in my first deployment, happened to my old man in his. Some folks just aren't built for the waiting." "But her name isn't even Jodie," Elias protested, confusion momentarily overriding his anger. "It's Melanie." This prompted a round of laughter that Kirzath found completely inappropriate given the evident distress of their comrade. Human social dynamics remained largely impenetrable despite his best efforts to understand them. "Jodie isn't the person, rookie," Nakamura explained gently. "It's what we call whoever moves in on your relationship while you're deployed. Old military tradition, goes back centuries." Kirzath's translator struggled with this concept, offering several conflicting interpretations before settling on symbolic representation of romantic usurper. The Dactyl made a mental note to add this to his growing lexicon of human military terminology. "Donovan, package from your father," the captain continued, apparently deciding it was best to move on. He handed over a long, heavy container that Kirzath immediately recognized as a weapon case. The sergeant opened it with practiced ease, revealing a gleaming civilian-grey shotgun with ornate engravings along the barrel. A handwritten note was attached, which Donovan read aloud. "Son, figured the standard issue garbage they give you might jam when you need it most. This old girl has been in the family since the Mars uprising, never failed a Donovan yet. Keep your head down and come home in one piece. Dad." This was met with appreciative whistles and exclamations from the other humans. Kirzath's confusion must have been evident as Corporal Rivera leaned toward him and explained quietly, "It's not about practical value. Their standard rifles are technically superior. It's about connection to family history, tradition." The weapon represents his father's concern and their shared heritage. Kirazath clicked his acknowledgement, though he remained puzzled. Dactyl warriors received their weapons based on efficiency metrics and combat specialization. The idea of using an inferior weapon because of sentimental attachment was profoundly alien, potentially dangerous even. Yet, he had observed that these emotional connections somehow strengthened human resolve rather than weakening it. Nakamura, stasis container from your grandmother. The medic accepted a small box with reverent care. When opened, it revealed what appeared to be simple baked goods. Cookies, Kirazath recalled from previous cultural briefings. What was notable were the 3 official-looking notes attached to the container. Nakamura chuckled as he read them. One from the Earthside Inspector, one from the Orbital Station Security, and one from our own base commander, all requiring an inspection fee of exactly 3 cookies each. He looked up with a wry smile. Grandmother Nakamura's legendary snickerdoodles claim more victims. She's been sending these since my grandfather's service in the Belt conflicts. The family joke is that her cookies have been tasted by more high-ranking officers than the official military ration developers. He offered the container around, each human taking one with expressions of exaggerated gratitude. When the box reached Kirazath, he hesitated, remembering his previous experience with human food. His digestive system could process it, technically, but the sensory experience was rarely pleasant. Go ahead, Nakamura encouraged. I told my grandmother about you in my last message. She adjusted the recipe to be compatible with Dactyl physiology. Less sugar, more protein enzymes. Surprised and somewhat touched by this consideration, Kirazath accepted one of the small discs. It still tasted strange to his palate, like nutritional supplement mixed with maintenance lubricant, but it was considerably more palatable than previous attempts at cross-species cuisine. He made appropriate sounds of appreciation, which seemed to satisfy Nakamura. The distribution continued with various items of apparent significance to their recipients: holographic messages, small tokens, preserved foods, and articles of clothing. Kirazath observed that even the smallest item could trigger an emotional response disproportionate to its practical value. A simple woven bracelet reduced Corporal Rivera to tears, though she insisted they were happy tears, another human contradiction that his translator struggled to pass. Finally, Captain Reeves lifted a large heavy package, and last but certainly not least, Donovan, another package. This one's from your sister Amelia. The sergeant accepted the substantial box with raised eyebrows. Wasn't expecting anything from her, she's usually deployed herself. When he opened it, the contents created an immediate reaction among the humans. A sudden silence, followed by exclamations of awe and what Kirazath's translator identified as reverent profanity. The package contained 1 package of 12 dozen uni-size socks, 1 family-sized container of foot powder, 1 box of a gross of unlubricated, unmedicated condoms, 1 box of 12 packages of alcohol-based baby wipes. Perez observed the humans' reactions with growing confusion. These items appeared to be basic supplies, nothing that would warrant such reverence. He had witnessed less excitement when they'd received advanced weapon modifications or rare luxury items. How is this an amazing present? He finally asked, mandibles clicking in confusion. You never react this way to gifts from other families? Holy Grail, man, Thornton exclaimed, lifting the box of socks as if it contained precious metals. Your sister is officially a deployment goddess, Donovan. Kirazath rapidly blinked his nictating membranes in the gesture he'd adopted to signal confusion to his human companions. You don't get it, do you? Elias said, momentarily distracted from his romantic troubles. Let me explain. See, in the trenches, especially in this muddy hellscape, our feet are constantly wet. Trenchfoot was killing soldiers before bullets did in ancient Earth wars. Fresh, dry socks? That's not just comfort, that's survival. Donovan nodded, already opening the foot powder. Same with this stuff. Anywhere humans get moist feet, underarms, groin, we risk fungal infections, chafing, all sorts of misery that can take you out of the fight faster than enemy fire. On a long march, good foot care is worth more than extra ammunition. Kirazath considered this. While Dactyl physiology differed significantly, their exoskeletons didn't produce moisture the way human skin did. He could understand the practical value of maintaining physical comfort for optimal combat performance. Still, the level of enthusiasm seemed excessive. "But what purpose do the other items serve?" he asked, gesturing toward the remaining contents. "There are no infant humans here requiring cleansing, and the prophylactic devices seem unnecessary in an all-combat unit." This prompted a round of laughter that Kirzath had learned to recognize as "at his expense," though without malice. "The condoms aren't for sex, Kirzath," Rivera explained, picking up one of the small packages. "They're multi-purpose tools. You can put them over rifle barrels to keep out mud and dust. They're thin enough to shoot right through when needed. They're waterproof, so they protect small electronics or important documents. You can use them as water carriers in an emergency or as pressure bandages. Some guys even stretch them over their night vision equipment to protect it from rain." "And the wipes," Nakamura added, "are practically portable showers. Clean wounds, sanitize hands before eating, freshen up when you haven't seen running water in weeks. The alcohol content means they're also good fire starters in damp conditions." Captain Reeves nodded approvingly. "Your sister remembers her deployments well, Donovan. That's about as perfect a care package as I've ever seen." Kiridzath's confusion only deepened. If these items are so obviously valuable, why aren't they standard issue? Why must you depend on family members to provide essential equipment? The question prompted a moment of silence, followed by a collective outburst of laughter that seemed to release some of the tension that had been building in the cramped bunker. "Welcome to the military, Bugman," Donovan said, clapping one of Kirzath's secondary arms with surprising gentleness. "Some things are universal, I guess, even across species. The people who decide what's essential are never the ones crawling through the mud." Captain Reeves checked his chronometer. "All right, enjoy your packages, but be ready to move in 2 hours. Intelligence suggests enemy movement in Sector 7, and we're being repositioned to reinforce the line." As the humans gathered their treasures and began to disperse, Kirzath remained still, processing this new information about his allies. There was something almost admirable about their adaptability, their ability to find solutions to problems their own military hierarchy failed to address. It was inefficient and chaotic by Dactyl standards, but undeniably effective. Perhaps, he reflected, watching Elias already looking more composed as Thornton shared her spicy crisps with him, there was something to learn from these strange contradictory beings. The Dactyl way valued uniformity, predictability, and clear hierarchies, qualities that had built their interstellar empire. But here, in the mud and chaos of a battlefield that refused to conform to strategic projections, the human capacity for improvisation and their strange emotional bonds seemed to provide a different kind of strength. As he ducked out of the bunker to return to his observation post, Kirzath found himself wondering what a Dactyl equivalent of a perfect care package might contain. The question had never occurred to him before meeting these humans, and the fact that he was considering it now felt like a small but significant shift in his understanding of the universe. Behind him, he could hear Donovan already organizing a sock distribution system based on foot size and patrol schedules. Apparently, even in their generosity, humans couldn't escape their love of creating new systems, however temporary or informal. Kiridzath turned his compound eyes back to the battlefield, his perceptions subtly altered. The war remained unchanged, brutal, unnecessary, and likely to escalate further, but for the first time since being assigned to this mixed species unit, he felt something unexpected. A flicker of curiosity about what the next supply drop might bring, and whether his human squadmates might consider him when requesting items from home. It was an irrational thought, unbecoming of a Dactyl warrior. He would need to meditate on it later, to restore proper emotional distance. But for now, as artillery flashed on the distant horizon, he allowed himself to wonder if perhaps the Terran saying about foxholes and madness contained a kernel of wisdom after all. As Kirzath maintained his vigilant watch, the distant rumble of artillery grew more frequent. The acrid smell of ozone and burnt plastics wafted across the battlefield, a telltale sign of advanced energy weapons being deployed. He clicked his mandibles in concern. This level of firepower suggested the enemy was making a significant push. Inside the bunker, the mood had shifted. The brief respite provided by the mail call was over, and the reality of their situation reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. Captain Reeves was hunched over the holographic display, his weathered face illuminated by the flickering blue light of tactical overlay. "All right, people, listen up," Reeves barked, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Enemy forces are massing in Sector 7, just as intel suggested. We're being redeployed to reinforce the line. I want everyone geared up and ready to move in 15 minutes. The response was immediate. Gone was the jovial atmosphere of moments ago, replaced by the practiced efficiency of veteran soldiers preparing for combat. Kirzath watched with grudging admiration as his human squadmates transformed before his eyes. Elias, who had been on the verge of an emotional breakdown earlier, now checked his weapon with calm precision. Thornton hefted her massive plasma cannon, all traces of her usual boisterous humor replaced by a focused intensity that reminded Kirzath of Dactyl berserkers before a charge. As they prepared, Kirzath found himself reflecting on the strange duality of these humans. In one moment they could be fragile, emotional creatures, fixated on small comforts from home. In the next, they were hardened warriors, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. It was a flexibility of mind that both confused and intrigued him. "Hey, Bugman!" Donovan called out, interrupting Kirzath's thoughts. The sergeant approached, holding out a pair of socks and a small container of foot powder. "I know you don't need these, but maybe you can use them to clean your mandibles or something. Consider it a welcome to the squad." Kirzath accepted the items, his compound eyes flickering in what humans had learned to interpret as surprise. Thank you, Sergeant. This is unexpected." Donovan shrugged, a gesture Kirzath had come to associate with human nonchalance. "Yeah, well, we're in this mess together, aren't we? Might as well share the wealth." Before Kirzath could formulate a response, alarms blared throughout the compound. Captain Reeves' voice crackled over the comm system. "All units, prepare for immediate deployment. Enemy forces have breached the outer perimeter in Sector 8. This is not a drill." The next hours passed in a blur of plasma fire, explosions, and the chaos of close-quarters combat. Kirzath found himself fighting side by side with his human squadmates in a way he never had before. The battle pushed them all to their limits, forcing them to rely on each other in ways that transcended species differences. Elias proved his worth, using his adaptive tech skills to hijack an enemy communications array, feeding false information that led a significant portion of their forces into an ambush. Thornton's heavy weapons fire provided crucial cover as they advanced, her laughter somehow audible even over the din of battle. Nakamura moved tirelessly between injured soldiers, his hands steady even as energy bolts sizzled past. But it was Corporal Rivera who truly surprised Kirzath. In the midst of the fighting, she suddenly called for a ceasefire in a small sector. Confused, but trusting her judgment, the squad complied. Rivera then stepped out, unarmed, and began speaking in the enemy's language, a dialect she had apparently been studying in secret. Her words, incomprehensible to Kirzath, seemed to have a profound effect on the enemy soldiers. Within minutes, a group of them had laid down their weapons, choosing surrender over continued bloodshed. It was a victory achieved not through superior firepower, but through understanding and communication, a concept that challenged everything Kirzath had been taught about warfare. As the battle wound down and they secured their new prisoners, Kirzath found himself re-evaluating many of his preconceptions. The humans' unpredictability, which he had once seen as a liability, had proven to be their greatest strength. Their ability to adapt, to find unconventional solutions, had turned what could have been a devastating defeat into a hard-won victory. Back at the forward base, as they tended to their wounds and began the process of debriefing, Kirzath approached Captain Reeves. "Sir," he began, his translator struggling to convey the nuance of his clicks and chirps, "I believe I owe you and the squad an apology." Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What for, Kirzath?" "I have underestimated the effectiveness of your methods and the strength of your species. I see now that there is much I can learn from serving alongside humans." The captain smiled, that strange baring of teeth that no longer seemed so threatening to Kirzath. "Well, I'd say this deployment has been educational for all of us. You've taught us a thing or two as well, you know." As they spoke, Kirzath noticed Elias sitting alone staring at the crumpled letter from earlier. Without fully understanding why, Kirzath moved to join him. "Private Elias," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I have observed that humans often seek companionship in times of emotional distress. If you wish to engage in conversation about your situation, I am available." Elias looked up, surprise evident on his face. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Thanks, Kirzath. You know what? I think I'd like that." As they began to talk, Kirzath realized that perhaps the most valuable lesson he had learned wasn't about tactics or combat effectiveness. It was about connection, about the strength that comes from bonds forged in the crucible of shared experience. The war was far from over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new horrors to face. But as Kiazath looked around at these strange, contradictory, remarkable humans he now called comrades, he felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving the Dactyl creche, a sense of belonging. In the distance, artillery continued to rumble, but here, in this moment, Kiazath found an unexpected peace. He had come to this planet as a Dactyl warrior. He was beginning to think he might leave it as something more, a soldier of a united front, where the strengths of different species combined to create something greater than the sum of its parts. As the night deepened and the squad settled in for whatever rest they could find, Kiazath realized he was actually looking forward to the next mail call. Not for himself, Dactyl didn't receive personal mail, but to see what new surprises his human squadmates might receive, and how those small comforts from home might be adapted to serve them all in this harsh, unforgiving battlefield. The war raged on, but in this small corner of the conflict, something new was taking root. It was a camaraderie that defied traditional military doctrine, a connection that bridged the vast gulf between species, and as Kiazath finally allowed himself to rest, his antenna gently swaying in the night breeze, he wondered if perhaps this unlikely bond might be the key to not just winning the war, but to forging a lasting peace in its aftermath. In the quiet moments before sleep claimed him, Kiazath found himself considering a question he never thought he'd ask. What would he put in a care package for his human squadmates? The very idea was so foreign, so utterly undactyl, that he almost chittered with laughter, but as he drifted off, his mind filled with possibilities, each one a small testament to how much he had changed and how much he had yet to learn. 3 weeks after the battle that had changed their sector's strategic landscape, Kiazath found himself once again standing at the edge of the forward trench, but this time with different eyes. The battlefield still bore the scars of plasma fire and artillery, but small patches of indigenous vegetation had begun to reclaim the churned earth, stubborn life reasserting itself amid destruction. It seemed an apt metaphor for the resilience he'd witnessed in his human companions. Behind him, the forward base had evolved from a hasty defensive position into something more permanent. The humans called it nesting, their peculiar tendency to establish comfort and familiarity even in the most hostile environments. Kiazath had initially found it inefficient, but now recognized its psychological value. Morale, he had learned, was as crucial to human combat effectiveness as ammunition or tactical positioning. Contemplating the mysteries of the universe again, Corporal Rivera's voice interrupted his thoughts. She approached with 2 steaming cups, offering one to him. "It's that herbal tea Nakamura synthesized to be compatible with your digestive system. Thought you might appreciate it." Kir accepted the cup, his secondary hands carefully cradling the hot liquid. "Thank you, Corporal. I was merely observing the landscape. It changes daily." Rivera nodded, sipping her own beverage as she joined him in surveying the terrain. "That's the thing about war zones. They're never static. Kind of like people." She glanced at him with what he had learned to recognize as a meaningful look. "You've changed since you joined us, you know." Before Kiazath could respond, a commotion from the command bunker drew their attention. Private Thornton emerged, waving excitedly. "Mail drop incoming," she shouted, her voice carrying across the compound, "and apparently it's a big one." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Human soldiers emerging from various positions, conversations halting mid-sentence, maintenance tasks abandoned. Kiazath had observed this phenomenon enough times now to anticipate it, yet it still fascinated him how these hardened warriors could transform into eager juveniles at the mere mention of correspondence from home. As they gathered in the expanded command center, Kiazath noticed something unusual. Captain Reeves was smiling more broadly than usual, and there seemed to be an air of anticipation beyond the normal mail call excitement. "Before we distribute personal items," Reeves announced, "I have some news. The intelligence gathered during our last operation, combined with Corporal Rivera's unexpected diplomatic initiative, has led to a significant development. 3 of the 5 enemy factions in this sector are now engaging in preliminary peace talks." A stunned silence fell over the group, followed by a cautious ripple of hope. 4 months of brutal fighting and suddenly peace was a tangible possibility rather than a distant dream. "Don't get too excited," Reeves cautioned. "This is just the beginning of a process that could take months, and the 2 remaining factions have intensified their operations in response. But it's progress. the first real progress since this 2-week pacification began. Sergeant Donovan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since their last battle where he'd sustained a minor injury, finally spoke up. "So we might not all die here after all. That's a pleasant surprise." The gallows humor drew appreciative chuckles from the squad. Kirzath had initially been disturbed by humans' tendency to joke about death and suffering, but had come to understand it as a coping mechanism, another adaptation that helped them function in circumstances that might otherwise overwhelm their emotional capacity. "Now, on to more immediate matters," Reeves continued, gesturing to the supply officer who began distributing packages. "Looks like someone's been talking about our joint species unit back home. There's been an unusual level of interest in your welfare." As packages were handed out, Kirzath observed the usual rituals of excitement, disappointment, and camaraderie. Elias received a care package from his mother that seemed to help ease the lingering pain of his romantic betrayal. Nakamura got another batch of his grandmother's cookies, this time with a note indicating she had been experimenting with recipes specifically designed for his insect friend with the complicated name. Thornton whooped with delight at receiving a rare bottle of Martian whiskey, immediately promising to save it for when we either win this war or are about to die trying. Rivera received a data crystal containing research papers from her former academic colleagues, who had apparently continued her work on interspecies communication in her absence. What surprised Kirzath was when the supply officer approached him directly. "Lieutenant Kirzath, we have something for you as well." The Dactyl warrior's compound eyes flickered in confusion. "There must be an error. Dactyl do not receive personal correspondence." "No error, sir," the officer insisted, holding out a medium-sized package. "This came through official channels, but it's definitely addressed to you personally." With hesitant movements, Kirzath accepted the package. The entire squad had fallen silent, watching with undisguised curiosity. Even Captain Reeves seemed intrigued by this unprecedented development. "Well, open it already," Thornton urged, practically bouncing with anticipation. "I'm dying to see what a Dactyl care package looks like." Kirzath carefully broke the seal and opened the container. Inside, he found several items that momentarily rendered him speechless. There was a small vial of specialized joint lubricant, the expensive kind usually reserved for high-ranking officers, that would ease the discomfort his secondary arms had been experiencing in the planet's human atmosphere. Beneath that was a package of nutrient crystals formulated specifically for Dactyl physiology, a luxury rarely seen on the front line. But what truly shocked him was a small holographic projector. When activated, it displayed an image of his creche group from the military academy, along with a message in Dactyl script that his squadmates couldn't read. The message was simple but unprecedented. "Your unique experiences provide valuable data. Survive and return." "What does it say?" Elias asked, peering at the unfamiliar characters. Kirzath hesitated, then offered a simplified translation. "It is encouragement from my former instructors. They wish me to return safely." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it omitted the significant cultural context. For a Dactyl to receive personal recognition from creche masters was virtually unheard of. It suggested that his unusual assignment had attracted attention at the highest levels of Dactyl command, attention that could either lead to advancement or to careful monitoring as a potential deviant. "Well, look at that," Donovan said with a grin. "Turns out even your bug people have hearts somewhere under all that carapace." "Dactyl do not have hearts in the human sense," Kirzath responded automatically. "Our circulatory system utilizes a distributed network of—" "It's an expression, bug man," Donovan interrupted, clapping him on his upper shoulder. "It means they care about you." Before Kirzath could formulate a response, Captain Reeves cleared his throat. "There's one more package here. It's addressed to all of you, the entire squad." This was unusual enough to draw everyone's attention. Reeves placed a large container on the central table and stepped back. "It's from High Command, both Terran and Dactyl divisions." The squad exchanged wary glances. Packages from Command typically meant new orders or equipment testing requirements, rarely anything pleasant. Donovan, as the ranking non-commissioned officer, stepped forward to open it. As the contents were revealed, expressions of disbelief spread across the humans' faces. Kirzath moved closer, his antennae twitching with curiosity. Inside were 6 specialized combat suits, 5 human-sized and 1 clearly designed for Dactyl physiology. They weren't standard issue. Even Kizath could see that these were advanced prototypes, incorporating both human and Dactyl technology in a seamless integration that must have required unprecedented cooperation between the species' research divisions. "There's a message," Rivera said, picking up a datapad from among the equipment. She read aloud. "To the members of Joint Special Operations Unit 7, Alpha, your unique operational methods and interspecies cooperation have provided valuable data on combined tactical approaches. These prototype integrated combat systems have been developed based on observations of your unit's performance. Field testing is authorized effective immediately. Additional joint species units are being formed based on your operational model. Detailed briefing to follow within 48 hours. A stunned silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. They hadn't just been fighting a war, they had been unwitting participants in an experiment that was now shaping military doctrine at the highest levels. "Well, I'll be damned," Thornton finally said, running her hand over one of the suits. "They've been watching us this whole time. And learning," Nakamura added quietly. "These suits, they're unlike anything I've seen before. The medical systems alone are years ahead of current field technology." Kiritsaf examined the suit design for his physiology with growing amazement. It incorporated solutions to problems he hadn't even reported. Adaptations that could only have come from careful observation of how his body moved and functioned in combat situations. The implications were both impressive and somewhat disturbing. "So what does this mean?" Ilias asked, looking to Captain Reeves. "Are we some kind of test case now?" Reeves shook his head. "I think we're beyond the test phase. This is implementation. They're scaling up whatever it is they think we've been doing right." Kirzath found himself experiencing an emotion that his translator struggled to define, a complex mixture of pride, vindication, and concern. "They are creating more mixed units," he said slowly. "They believe our differences create tactical advantages." "Of course they do," Donovan said with a sardonic smile. "Your precision and our chaos, combined into one unpredictable package, must be driving the enemy's strategists crazy trying to anticipate our moves." As the squad began examining their new equipment more closely, Kizath stepped outside, needing a moment to process this development. The sky above was darkening with approaching storm clouds, a fitting backdrop for his tumultuous thoughts. He had been raised to believe in the superiority of Dactyl military doctrine, in the power of uniformity, discipline, and hierarchical command. Yet here was evidence that the highest levels of Dactyl leadership saw value in the very human traits he had initially dismissed as weaknesses: adaptability, emotional connection, individual initiative. Rivera joined him outside, her expression thoughtful. "Heavy stuff, isn't it? Finding out you're part of something bigger than you realized." "Indeed," Kizath agreed. "I am uncertain how to interpret this development." Rivera leaned against the sandbag wall, looking up at the gathering storm. "You know what I think? I think somewhere up the chain, someone smart finally realized what soldiers have known forever. That wars aren't won by perfect plans or superior technology alone. They're won by people who can adapt when everything goes wrong, who can find strength in their connections to each other." She turned to face him directly. "That's what you've been learning with us, isn't it? That there's power in our differences, in the space between your way and ours." Tiras considered her words carefully. "Perhaps," he admitted, "I have observed that while Dactyl excel at executing predetermined strategies, humans demonstrate remarkable capacity for improvisation when circumstances change unexpectedly. Together, we cover each other's vulnerabilities." Rivera smiled. "Exactly, and apparently the powers that be have noticed." Before they could continue their conversation, alarms blared throughout the compound. Captain Reeves' voice came over the communications system. "All personnel to battle stations. Enemy forces approaching from the north. Heavy mechanized units detected." The response was immediate. Within moments, the squad had assembled, their new combat suits partially donned despite unfamiliarity with the systems. Kizath found his own suit surprisingly intuitive, as if designed specifically for his movement patterns, which, he realized, it probably had been. As they prepared to move out, Donovan approached Kurtzath. "Hey Bugman, before we go get ourselves killed testing these fancy new suits, I wanted to say something." Kurtzath tilted his head in the gesture he'd adopted to signal attentiveness to humans. 4 months ago, I wouldn't have trusted a Dactyl to watch my back in combat. Thought your kind was too rigid, too by the book. Donovan's weathered face broke into a rare, genuine smile. Just wanted you to know that there's no one I'd rather have in my foxhole now, even if you are crazier than me. The reference to their first conversation about foxholes and madness was not lost on Kirzath. He extended his primary right arm in the human gesture of camaraderie. The honor is mutual, Sergeant, though I maintain that by objective standards, humans remain the more unstable species. Donovan laughed, clasping the offered limb firmly. Damn right we are, and thank the stars for that. This war needs a little creative insanity. As they moved out to face the enemy advance, Kirzath found himself reflecting on how profoundly his perspective had changed. He had arrived on this planet seeing his assignment with humans as a burden to be endured. Now, he recognized it as an opportunity that had expanded his understanding not just of warfare, but of connection itself. The battle that followed would later be described in official reports as a textbook example of joint species tactical integration. The new combat suits enhanced their natural abilities while compensating for species-specific vulnerabilities. Kirzath's precision and tactical awareness complemented Thornton's raw firepower. Elias's technological adaptability worked in perfect harmony with Dactyl methodical planning. Rivera's unexpected diplomatic initiatives created openings that Nakamura's medical expertise then exploited, saving lives on both sides of the conflict. And through it all, Donovan's leadership style, a blend of human flexibility and Dactyl discipline that he had unconsciously developed over their months together, kept them functioning as a cohesive unit despite the chaos of battle. When it was over, as they stood amid the aftermath of what might prove to be a turning point in the conflict, Kirzath found himself experiencing yet another unfamiliar emotion. His translator, after several attempts, finally identified it as hope, not just for survival, but for something more profound. The possibility that their unlikely alliance might represent a new path forward for both species. 2 days later, as they gathered once again in the command center for their official briefing on their new status as a prototype for future joint operations, Captain Reeves had one more surprise for them. Before we get to the official business, he announced, there's been another mail drop. He held up a package that bore Kirzath's name. Seems you're becoming popular, Lieutenant. This time, Kirzath accepted the package without hesitation, curious despite himself. Inside was a simple container of specialized cleaning solution for his compound eyes, a comfort item he had mentioned in passing weeks ago during a particularly dusty patrol. Attached was a note in careful Dactyl script that read, "For clear vision on the path ahead, your foxhole companions." Looking up, he saw his squad mates watching with barely contained smiles. "You sent for this? For me?" "Thornton's idea," Elias admitted. "But we all contributed. Figured if we're going to be the model for some new kind of joint force, we should start our own traditions." "First joint space care package in military history," Thornton declared proudly. "Had to pull some serious strings to get it through the Dactyl supply chain. You wouldn't believe the paperwork." Piers carefully placed the cleaning solution in his equipment pouch, a gesture that seemed inadequate to express what he was feeling. Thank you. This is unexpected." "That's what family does," Nakamura said quietly. "They notice what you need, even when you don't say it directly." Family. The concept had always been alien to Kirzath, a human weakness, an unnecessary emotional attachment. Now, looking at these 5 humans who had somehow become essential to his understanding of himself and his place in the universe, he wondered if perhaps it was not a weakness at all, but a different kind of strength. As Captain Reeves began the official briefing, outlining their new designation as Special Joint Operations Unit Alpha and their expanded role in both combat and peace negotiations, Kirzath found himself planning his response. Not just a reciprocal gift, though he was already considering what items might bring comfort to each of his human companions, but a deeper commitment to this unexpected bond they had formed. The war was far from over. The peace talks remained fragile, the remaining enemy factions more determined than ever. Their path ahead would be neither easy nor safe. But as Kirzath listened to the briefing, he realized that something fundamental had changed, not just in the strategic landscape, but in himself. He had arrived on this planet as a Dactyl warrior, shaped by creche and doctrine to be a perfect, interchangeable part in a vast military machine. He would continue forward as something new, a soldier who understood that true strength came not from uniformity, but from connection, not from erasing differences, but from finding how they could complement each other. And if that made him, by Dactyl standards, as crazy as his human companions, well, as Donovan would say, there were worse fates than sharing a foxhole with madness, especially when that madness might just change the course of a war, and perhaps even the relationship between their species. As the briefing concluded and they prepared for their next mission, Kierzat found himself for the first time in his military career, looking forward not just to the tactical challenge ahead, but to the shared experience of facing it together. Socks, cookies, cleaning solution, and all. As the final scene fades, Kierzat and his human companions stand together, their silhouettes outlined against the alien sunset, different in form, but united in purpose. If you enjoyed this journey across the stars and between species, don't forget to like this video to help others discover this story. Share it with friends who appreciate tales of unlikely connections forged in the crucible of conflict. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or your own experiences of finding common ground with someone completely different from yourself. Subscribe to our channel for more original stories that explore the complexities of war, peace, and the unexpected bonds that can form even in the harshest circumstances. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads of science fiction that challenges perspectives and imagines new possibilities for connection across the universe. Until next time, remember that sometimes the strongest alliances are forged between the most unlikely companions. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you among the stars next time.